Bien, buenos días, damas y caballeros, colegas, amigos. Vamos a dar comienzo entonces al programa para el día de hoy, jueves 18 de mayo. Y esta primera parte va a ser en inglés, ¿no? Y no va a tener traducción simultánea. Sin embargo, en la ronda de preguntas y respuestas me ofrezco obviamente a hacer las traducciones necesarias para que puedan entonces entender aquellos que lo necesiten. Tengo el agrado de presentar a ustedes al profesor Dr. Dagmar Provin. Dagmar Provin has been a policy officer at NVAO, the accreditation organization of the Netherlands and Flanders, since 2013. He's a member of the project team responsible for development and execution of the institutional reviews Flanders for the period 2015-2017. Prior to this role, he was part-time professor for logic, philosophy of science and epistemology at Ghent University for 3 years. Between 2007 and 2013, he conducted a postdoctoral fellowship of the Research Foundation, Flanders, FWO Vlaanderen, and concentrated on the formal study of problem-solving processes within the adaptive logic program. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to give you Mr. Dagmar Provin.
Many thanks. Many thanks for inviting me here. And I have to apologize, I do not speak a word of Spanish. I can try, but I think you would suffer more than you would be pleased about it. I had this own international experience, a cross-border activity, but it was in Paris, France, so I only studied some more French, which I already studied at high school in Belgium, because we're a bilingual language, of course. So what I'm here, not in the role for really NVO. I will be talking about NVO for a minute, of course, but it's especially for the European Consortium of Accreditation, for accreditation. And so what I will be talking about is the assessment of quality in internationalization. And it's the first time that I can follow my own presentation over there, which is a very nice experience. If there would be any things unclear during the talk, please interrupt me. Don't mind about it, because, well, I'm here speaking English, and maybe if things are a little bit unclear, or if I do not explain things in a way you would like, just raise your hand and ask a question. I don't mind about it. Okay. So I don't think people are here to question internationalization or activities of internationalization. We are here to discuss how it can be organized, and I'm here to say some things about how it could be assessed. And I will do it at the institutional level, because the framework that has been developed both works on the institutional level, but there's also a part that concerns programs. If you would study them, you would see that there's a lot of similarity, and the framework or the basis that is behind it will be equal for programs or for institutions. It's just the details that will differ. So I will concentrate on the institutions. If you would have questions about program levels, I also introduce them into the slides, and if you have the slides show afterwards, you can also see how it works at program level. I will start with 2 quotes of Hans de Wit from his 2009 publication, Measuring Success in the Internationalization of Higher Education. Over the past 25 years, the international dimension of higher education in Europe has become more important for governments, higher education institutions, and accreditation bodies. But then again, today, internationalization itself is perceived as an indicator for the quality of higher education, but so far only few European-wide approaches have assessed the quality of internationalization. So there's a lot of activity, and institutions are involved in internationalizations, But then how do we compare this internationalization? How do we assess it? And how do we see if there's something to compare all these activities from institutions with one another? And if we look at the activities of programs and of institutions, everywhere we see there's quality assurance. But what about this special component that has been developed in the institutions, saying the internationalization component? And I see things are not really moving here, so voila. So these are all kinds of elements that are special or are important within the framework of internationalization. We see the curriculum, we see achieved learning outcomes, shared goals, objective resources. There's all kinds of elements that are important when we speak about internationalization. But how do they link together, and how do they say something about the quality of internationalization? I hope this one. So in a sense, the whole project started with something that was developed by the accreditation organization of the Netherlands and Flanders, and it was to show, it was because higher education institutions asked when they were in the framework of quality assurance, can you also say something about the quality of our internationalization activities? Because we are all involved in it, but we do not see it within what is said within the framework of quality assurance. And so they could get this extra degree as a fact, something that was next to the normal quality assurance in Flanders and the Netherlands, saying, well, you're doing very well at the level of internationalization. But this framework was within the Netherlands and Flanders, and of course when it was presented, other countries also showed interest. And that's why ECA started to develop a framework that could be used European-wide. That was not only linked to the quality assurance of the Netherlands and Flanders, but that could be used in a broader sense. And so you see some of the partners that are in the consortium, and it's not only linked or not only restricted to ECA members, there's also internationalization agencies, stakeholder organizations. So why are they all involved? Because, of course, the framework should be completely settled within the field of internationalization. So not only in quality assurance, but also stakeholders should be involved. And as you can see, also higher education institutions. So all stakeholders could control what was happening within the development of this framework. And the result was, well, if you can see it, yeah, here we are. Oh, I'm a little bit, yeah. 3 publications resulted from this. 3 important publications which can be found on the website of ECA. And that's the framework for the assessment of quality and internationalization. That's the important stuff. That's the methodology. That's how the internationalization quality can be measured at program level, at institutional level. So that's the framework, that's the methodology that was developed within this project of ECA. But of course there's some explanation on the standards and the criteria in there, and that's the guide for assessing the quality of internationalization. And one of the very special, the lingua franca in fact, that is used if you want to assess these programs, and that even is important at institutional level, is the introduction to international and intercultural learning outcomes. So the lingua franca in fact are of course the intended learning outcomes, with at the same part of the same, or the 2 sides of the coin, the achieved learning outcomes. But if you want to speak about internationalization, you have this special counterpart of what we know as learning outcomes, and those are the international and intercultural learning outcomes. The intercultural are very well known. It's that people are used to dealing with people from other cultures, from other countries, speaking other languages, having other habits, just to know how to act and react within situations in which you meet people from other countries, from other cultures, even from people from your own country, but who are on another different part of a country, have different habits. So just being able to act, react, and live within these groups. The international learning outcomes are a little bit different and have more to do with the discipline you're functioning in. Even in your discipline, there can be different viewpoints, there can be different perspectives on the subject area you're studying. And even then, you have to be able to act and react with people who are, in a sense, in the same field as you are, but still have different perspectives in it. So those are two kinds of learning outcomes which are very important if we want to speak about internationalization. And they're, in a sense, the glue that fits everything together. So what was the big aim when we look at these three publications? What was the real aim to get to these results? Is to assess, first of all, of course, we want to assess internationalization. We also want to reward. It's not just some kind of putting control on it, but really rewarding those institutions or programs who really make an effort of putting internationalization into the programs or in the perspective of the institution. And also to enhance internationalization. It's not only control, it's not only rewarding what is already there, but showing what is here and what could be, where could your institution or program be in the future. So it still gives a perspective on evolution. It never puts standards as this should be the case. It's where you are at a certain moment and where you can grow to, where you can be in the future. And that's quite an important thing. It's an enhancement perspective. So as I said, it has grown as a distinctive quality feature in the Netherlands, and it has grown to something that can be used European-wide. So the European perspective is certainly in there. It's the purpose of using this framework in all possible parts of Europe, in all possible institutions, and by different quality assurance agencies who want to execute this methodology in a certain country. So it should be a flexible tool. It's not something fixed, it's a flexible tool that fits to the institutions Europe-wide. And maybe even beyond, but let's take it to the European perspective to start, and that will be very nice if this would happen already. So it leads, in fact, to a framework that is general, that can be used for many institutions, and it also should bring some transparency. If we have a framework that can be used European-wide, we also have a tool of transparency to show what internationalization is Europe-wide. So it is easier to compare what is happening at different institutions in different countries. So it started within the Netherlands and Flanders in some sense, and then there was some comparison possible. But if you make it as a general tool, it can be used Europe-wide. And so students can also see, well, if I want to do some cross-border activities, then I know what is happening in Spain. Then I know what's happening in Germany. I have a tool to compare. So if institutions get involved in it, they know they can make, in some sense, publicity with what is happening. If you have done all this effort on internationalization, then now you have some standard to put to show, well, where am I really in Europe with my internationalization activities, and what can I do to even get better? So at least you're somewhere on a scale of what is going on. But still, this is not that some specific standard is set which you have to meet, because in a sense, what the goals of your internationalization are defined by yourself. So it's not that this framework will put some goals that have to be met, some standards that have to be met. No, the goals and standards are set by the institution itself. And then the framework will control if you meet up to your own goals. If your institution really does what it should do once it has set these specific goals. Now we'll go, so what you can get if everything is okay and if you meet the standards of the framework, and even if you do it very well, because there are some levels, so you can, even of the standards, you can say you're unsatisfactory on a level, you're satisfactory, you're good, or you're excellent. If you want to get the certificate, now I have to push this button again, yeah. So the certificate over there. If you want to get this really nice certificate, then if you look at the standards, at least for 3 of them, you need to have a good or excellent. So it's not a free ride. But then again, if you say I want to get involved and I want to try to get this certificate, and it seems that, well, okay, things are going satisfactory, but not all is at the level of good, so it surpasses what can be expected, or there are still some little flaws in there, then at least, as I said, you also have an enhancement perspective. It's not only controlling, it's also saying, well, if you meet some extra features within your internationalization, then you may grow up to the different setting of going good and even excellent. So it's not a blame if you get satisfactory. It means, well, things are going fine, and maybe there are some little flaws in there, and in the future, if you can meet these, then you can go and grow to the certificate. So in fact, it's really a point in which you can control what is happening in my institution and where do I want to go to in the future. And then again, of course, you can also set the goal, I really want the certificate, and then you will have to make this extra effort. Okay. So, making the assessment of internationalization tangible. That's what we want to do. We want to make, how do we get to a feeling of what quality and internationalization could be? Is it just numbers? Is it just, well, we have 10 or 20% of our students going abroad to another institution? Well, mostly it delivers lots of mixed babies, but that doesn't mean that people really had something that learned them at the level of these international or intercultural learning outcomes. Did they really learn something when they were abroad? Did they learn something different than when they were in the home country? That's what you should know. That's what you should know in the end, and that's what you should be able to measure. So what did we want with the project? What's the tangibility? A methodology to assess or even to self-assess. Even as an institution, you could start the exercise. Even if you take the framework, you could start reading and trying to answer some of the criteria and some of the standards met there. So you can do this exercise yourself. The framework is there, it's published on the internet, so you can always try. To contribute to the enhancement and to reward quality, as I said before. Maybe this, I will not skip, but I will go a little bit faster on this one. The proprietary responsibility lies with ECA. And so, why is it within this group, within this ECA? That's because for methodological consistency, as I said, it should be a tool that makes comparison possible, but then of course the tool should be used in equal ways at each institution or at each program, so there should be methodological consistency. It also provides the training of experts and coordinators. The publishing of the reports or good practices and the awarded certificates is all in the hands of ECA. So each of the procedures will be controlled by ECA to see if it meets the standards that were set by the framework. And so ECA members will coordinate the assessment procedures. They will also offer the possibility to integrate it in regular procedures. As I said, it is an extra procedure above what already happens within quality assurance for the home country. So it can be added, it can be introduced in there as well. And so it would be a due process, that things wouldn't go on too long. So what do you get? What do you know once you get this certificate? What is the end point? What do you know when you have the certificate? Well, it is an indication of successful incorporation of a significant international and intercultural dimension into the purpose, into the function, and the delivery of education. It is a public demonstration of successful implementation of effective internationalization activities which demonstrably contribute to the quality of teaching and learning. So it is in the purpose, in the general purpose of what your education is set up for. It's also in the function of it. So what's mostly the function? Well, that you have teaching in, that you have research, and you have public service for your institution, but certainly also in the delivery. So what is happening in the programs? What do students do within the classroom? Do they have mixed classrooms with international groups? Are there international activities? Are there cross-border activities? How it's all organized, how it all functions in there. But even more, it should all have an effect, and that's the most important part, on the teaching and learning. So you can have a really big goal of internationalization, send all your students abroad, and in the end they haven't learned anything about internationalizations because none of the international or intercultural learning outcomes nor were seen where they should be in the program, nor were assessed in the program in a consistent way. So it should really be in the pores of teaching and learning. So, here we go. So now, how do we measure this internationalization? If we look at the cloudy sky, which is not really happening here in Barcelona very often, I think, but then okay. If you're looking at this sky, what does it tell you? There's one cloud, there's two clouds, three clouds. So all kinds of activities that could happen. And it could also be numbers. You could have all kinds of indicators. You could say, well, 10% of our students goes abroad. 20% is in an international classroom. We have a certain percent of students coming from abroad in our institution, etc. Does it say something about internationalization? Are all these different clouds hanging over there enough to say that something is going on internationalization? And then again, even for different institutions, for different countries, this internationalization can mean different things. If we look at the law of many countries, well, on education, they can set different standards. They can have some requirements of what should happen. And they can even set these numbers. But do these numbers say something about the internationalization output? Does it say something about the teaching and learning of these students on the field of internationalization? Quite often not. As I said, just some cross-border activity doesn't mean that students really have learned something. They have been somewhere, but that doesn't mean they have learned something or that something was incorporated within the process they were through. So if we look at two standard definitions of what internationalization is, we have the one from Knight, the process of integrating an international, intercultural or global dimension into the purpose, functions, or delivery of post-secondary education. As you can see, we have the purpose, the function, or delivery again, as we said, what you could have in the end when you reach the certificate. So the certificate, in a sense, what the definition is, what it is in the end, compares to what this quite well-known and accepted definition tells us. And then at program level, it says internationalization of the curriculum is the incorporation of an international and intercultural dimension into the preparation, the delivery and outcomes of a program. So that's at program level. The one is more system-wide, the second one is more at program level. So, but in the end, what it's all about and what's the central feature is that somewhere this internationalization should be in the teaching and in the learning. It's in the delivery and it's in the preparation, delivery and outcomes of a program. So it's in the teaching and in the learning. How is the teaching? How is the assessment? And what does the assessment say of the teaching process? And what have they learned in the end? You can have all kinds of intentions, you can have all kinds of intended learning outcomes. The process should lead to certain outcomes, and the program should be able to show that these intended learning outcomes have been met, have been reached by the students, so they really are achieved learning outcomes. So it's about teaching and learning. And okay, there the carrot drops from the air. What's the carrot? The carrot is the goals you have set by yourselves. as an institution. So it's not that the framework says, well, you should do this and that as internationalization, and then you get this really nice certificate from us. It's a little bit like this. It's in a frame, so it's a very nice thing. You can hang it on the wall. Once you have the certificate, but what does it say? Does it say that you have reached 10 or 20 or whatever goals that should be met by the framework? No. It's what you want to do yourself. It's what fits your institution and what the goals of your institution are. So most probably the goals that are set as an institution for internationalization start with what is expected nationwide. And then of course you have the goals that were set by your institution. And once they are set by your institution, you can see how can we intertwine it with the international activities and how can we make clear what these international goals are within the goals of our institution. That's the carrot. But there's more. Of course, the framework is not a free ride, as I said before, so there's also the spanking of the carrot. The carrot can be very nice, and you can very well know what the carrot is you want to reach, but then again, how do we get to this certain carrot? And do we get where we want? So the framework still sets some criteria and standards in a way that shows that the donkey can get to the carrot as he wants. And in a sense it's always a work in progress, because the carrot, you know the picture of the donkey with the stick on his back with the carrot hanging over there, and he will never reach it. And maybe that's possible, that you will never reach it, that you will never have the full perfect internationalization, but maybe you can get nearer and nearer and nearer to it. And so some spanking can be useful to get there. And maybe in the end we get to some level in which you say this is more than satisfactory and this is way more than what can be expected. But as I said before, we had the many clouds, and how would we measure it? Is it just a matter of numbers? Most probably not. What we want are descriptive criteria in which showing that how you can implement the goals that were set, how you can translate them to the teaching and learning. You have these very general goals you can set as an institution, which meet national criteria, which meet the criteria just, or the goals you have set as an institution. Then we have the separate group of internationalization ones, which should be intertwined with the general goals of an institution. And then the idea is, how do we translate it? How do we operationalize these goals that we have? And that's the descriptive criteria. We just want to see how all these more abstract goals are operationalized at teaching and learning level within an institution. And from the institution to the programs, of course. And then again, of course, as I said, the carrot is your thing. You choose which one you want. Because there's so many reasons why there could be internationalization activities. There can be so many restrictions on it that you can set it yourself. And the descriptive criteria only to see there if you can operationalize it in a means that delivers quality for the program, that delivers quality for the students who follow the internationalization activities. And so I just took this picture and I thought about it yesterday. Why do we have this one framework then? Is this possible? Well, of course it's possible, because we have this descriptive criteria. And if, for example, you look at the works of Calatrava, you can have his buildings in any country in the world, and you will recognize them everywhere. There's the Erasmus Bridge in Holland. This is from the station in Liège in Belgium. Of course, in Spain and in Portugal and everywhere, even in New York, you find all these buildings. And it's recognizable. It can fit any city, it can fit any country, and still it has a value. And still it has a value in each of these countries, for each of these cities. It will give something extra to what the city is. And so that's the same with the framework. The framework is there for each institution just to show what are you doing at this certain moment, how can you enhance it, and how do you compare to peers within Europe, or even international wide if it could be used further on. The next one. I hope you know the story that we are not the only rainbow looking for the pot of gold. The idea is once you're walking onto this rainbow, you should end up in the pot of gold, and this should be very nice. And so the pot of gold is the perfect internationalization, but of course there's many, many ways to get there. And there's more than one rainbow to get there. And that's the idea behind it, the same as the Calatrava. We just want to have a framework that fits every possible situation in which people are. Counting the clouds again. Here we go. It's not about the numbers. It's not just saying which quantitative criteria should be met. It's the qualitative criteria that show how you go from goals to the teaching and learning within the institution. Okay. So I think I already told this more than once. But now we can go to the level of the framework itself. Are there any questions by now? Is there something unclear? No. These are the standards. These are the qualitative standards that should be met if you want to go for the certificate. And underlying these standards there are some criteria which are a little bit more explicit, but again which can be adapted to the situation of the institution you're in. The first one is the intended internationalization. What do you want to reach as an institution? What are your goals? And of course these goals can be described in quantitative means, but still there can also be a qualitative measure about it. If, for example, in a program you say, well, in our classrooms we want 20% of foreign students. That's a certain number. And that's quite specific. If you would say it way broader, you could say we want to increase the number. But of course the specific one of 20% is way better than saying we want to increase it, because if you have a classroom of 100 students and you have one foreign one and then you have two of them, that's also increasing. So that's not really a measure that you can take. 20% is a little bit better. But you can even add a more qualitative feature on it, and you could say, well, we want 10% people from Asia, 10% from the United States, 10% from Africa. That's more qualitative. Then you really have things to measure. Of course that doesn't mean if you say we want 20% of foreign students is a bad one. But of course there's degrees of how to organize it and how to put your objective in these measures. Okay? But it's the intended one. What do we want to end up with? Why do we have this internationalization? That's the intended internationalization. And then of course you can have all these wonderful goals. For example, you want to make a new suit. You want to sew a new suit. That's a plan you have. Of course, if you want to make a suit, then you need some kind of plan. You have to make a sketch, and you have to know what kind of cloth you need and how many needles you need, and that's all kinds of stuff you need to make this suit. So you have this big plan, and then somewhere in your mind is, well, I really want to make this suit, but how do I do it? You have to start sketching, you have to know what cloth. So you need certain plans to do it. And then again once you have these plans, they also should be implemented. Because you want the suit, and you cannot wear a suit that is on paper. So you have to implement things. You need to realize it. That's the implementation. And once you're doing it, and it's the first time you will see, well, this suit really isn't what I had in mind. So there should be kind of control. You will have to wear it, you have to see which part drops of it because it wasn't sewed very well. That's the enhancement part you need. And at an institutional level, what is important that there's a kind of governance over this. You can have these plans, but of course, if it takes you 20 years to make a suit, that's not really a good governance. So there should be a nice plan behind it. There should be somewhere a control level in your head that says, well, if you ever want to reach this, you will have to take these actions and other if you want to reach it. So that's the kind of framework that's behind it. You have a big goal, you translate it into plans, you have to implement it, You have to make sure that there's an enhancement idea. That's why quality assurance is in it, of course, just to make the enhancement possible. And there's some governance above it. Okay. I hope this is... You can read this? This is big enough? Okay, that's nice. So as I said, we have the standards, and for each of the standards there are some criteria set. And now if we look at, we always want to know, suppose we want to go into this certificate, and we have to meet the standards, and we need to get the level of good or excellent. So how do we get it? Well, you are good when there's no flaw in one of these criteria. And you're satisfactory when showing that there are no real flaw, but maybe a little one, but that it's not too hard. Then you can say, well, we are at a satisfactory level. If there's a serious flaw in one of these criteria, then it will be an unsatisfactory for this standard. So you have the standard, and then you have the criteria operationalizing these standards. But as I said, they're at the descriptive level. So these adapt to what the situation in your organization is. It doesn't say quantitative standards. It doesn't say what really should be there. It only says once you have goals, how do you translate it within your institutional program? And here it's at the institutional level. Now, okay, intended internationalization, first of all, are these supported goals. What does it mean? The internationalization goals for the institution are documented. So it's not that they're somewhere in the air as the clouds, but really that there are documentation that you can find them on the website saying, well, these are the goals we have set as an institution. And these are shared and supported by stakeholders within and outside the institution. They're shared, so people at least know about what they be. It doesn't mean that they have to be able to recite them all, but at least that they know where the institution is going to. And they're also so shared and supported. People are, in their function, working on the realization of it. That's what's requested as a criterion. So, documented, shared, and supported. And then they have to be translated in verifiable objectives. Verifiable objectives have been formulated that allow monitoring the achievement of the institution's internationalization goals. So, if you have certain goals, you need to translate them in a way that they're controllable. As I said before, for example, at the program level, you can say, well, we want 10, 20, 30, 40% of foreign students within each of the classrooms of a program. That's quite something set up, but it's measurable. It's easy measurable. Which doesn't mean that you really have to reach it, of course. There's a learning process. Every time you take some effort, every time you put some goal, of course, there's always a possibility that things don't turn out as you want, or that they aren't as easy as you want. It's a work in progress, and that can also be shown in the whole thing, is that you can learn. It's not just setting goals, it's not just translating them in objectives, it's also what do we learn and how do we monitor it? How can we change this and how can we make it more real to reality? Third, it should have an impact on education. The internationalization goals explicitly include measures that contribute to the overall quality of teaching and learning. So they should be really in the pulse of the program, as I said before. You should see, if you even at an institutional level decide what the goals are, it should be seen within the programs how these goals are within the programs themselves. And then we come, of course, to the learning outcomes again, to the international and intercultural learning outcomes. If you have set something as a goal, it should be somewhere measurable or seen or transparent within the programs of the institution. Standard 2. As I said, we first had the big plans, the big goals, and these have to be translated into certain action plans. And now we have this very nice distinction in English. There is something as the fitness of purpose, and there is the fitness for purpose. The fitness of purpose was something that we had in the previous one. If we set goals, then we can ask the questions, are these goals fit of purpose? Are they really what we want to reach? Fitness for purpose is the institution's internationalization plans ensure the achievement of its internationalization goals. Are these plans fit for the purpose we have set? Are there really a plan that makes sure that we can reach the goals we have set out? And that's quite a difficult step, because once you have a goal, you also want to achieve it. The dimensions that should be in the action plans, and here we go again to what I said about the achieved learning outcomes and the intended learning outcomes on internationalization field, the international and intercultural ones. The institution's internationalization plans appropriately include at least the following dimensions: international and intercultural learning outcomes, here they are again, teaching, learning and research, staff and students. And these are the ones, if we would go to the framework for program level, these are some of the criteria that are in the standards at program level. You need to make sure that if you take measures at an institutional level, that it says something or that it gives the opportunities to staff, to students, to reach these international goals. If you want, for example, half of the group of your students to go abroad, then you need the facilities to make sure that students can do it. Then you have to support them. You cannot just put a goal and say, well, okay, take your own chances and go abroad. No, there should be some part of the institution, there should be measures taken within the institution that support students, that informs them, that helps them to get all kinds of formalities. And very important, you should have contact with other institutions of which you know, if my students go there, then at least they will get the learning outcomes that they would have when they have it in their own institution. If you have no view on that as an institution and you just leave your students go away, then you can hardly speak of an organized or well-organized internationalization. So that's the dimensions that should be in there. And of course, this is broad. How you do it, it doesn't prescribe how you have to do it. It just says, well, take these things into consideration, and at least we would like to see, when we come to the institution, that measures have been taken to it, that are set, and that are comparable to the goals that were set. So it's always, if you have a certain goal, how do you translate it, and how do these dimensions fit the goals that have been set? If, of course, your goal is not at all to get your students outside, but you only want to make international classrooms, then of course the measures you have to take for staff, for students, is different than when you want to let them go abroad. So these are different measures, different goals, different measures, but at least you will have to do something. Third one, to support the institution's internationalization plans are complemented by specific institution-wide instruments and adequate resources, which is quite evident, I think. Yes? Didn't you have it? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Here it is. I'm very sorry. I'll give you a minute to recapitulate. And I'll drink a little bit. Yeah, too many screens is also a little bit annoying for me. So. Are there any questions up to now? Any unclarities? Yeah. That's okay. This is the third one. Now I'm good. So, from goals to plans to implementation. Criterion 1 for the implementation, the information system. The institution has a functional management information system which enables it to collect and process relevant information regarding internationalization. You have set the goals, you have certain plans, and in your plans you have clear objectives of what you want to reach. If you want to know if things are going right, of course you need to measure them. You need to see at a certain time, if my goal is I want 30% of foreign students in my classrooms, then of course you have to see that this is really happening. If it's just a plan, it's just a plan. You will never get the suit if you just draw it. So at a certain time you will have to see if everything is going on as you wanted it. You have to take measures. If I'm making this suit, I will have to see if the sleeves are long enough. I was just cutting things and sewing them together, but in the end I will have to see if everything is of measure. And here again, you have to take the measures to see what is going on. Are there really 30% in the classrooms? And then interpret these things. Can I make a division? Can I see where these people come from? Can I see that in some classrooms there are 60% and in other classrooms I only have 10 to 20%? And what could be the reasons of it? So you have to not only measure them and just put the papers aside once you have all the tables with the numbers in it, you also have to interpret what is going on. So you have the information system, and based on the information system, you should have the information-driven management. The institution makes use of processed information for the effective management of its internationalization activities. You should learn from what you measure. Once you have made the measurements, these are the materials that can help you to revise the goals you have set. It could be that your goals were way too high in the sky. There were too many clouds, you didn't get it, and it's raining like hell by now. So you have to measure, and from measuring you can learn. It's a kind of learning system that should be installed within the institution, so you know. And in fact, if you compare this to what is in usual quality assurance, you can see that what is asked for internationalization is quite comparable. If you want to see what is happening for quality in your institution and you want to set a quality culture, then you're also looking at what is happening. How long do students take to get their diploma? How many credits can they take in 1 year? You measure all kinds of things just to know what is going on. Well, for internationalization, you do just the same. But it's at the level of internationalization. Have you set these goals? Did you have plans? Did you have objective translated from the goals? And do you measure them within your information system? And then of course you also have to show that there are realizations. You make measurements, and based on your measurements you show, well, you see we have set some goals and we realized some part of it. The institution can demonstrate the extent to which its internationalization plans are realized through documented outcomes and results. You show it. And as I said, even if you have set the goal of 30% and you only get to 20, that's also a result. That's not a blame. It's something you have shown. At least, for example, the number has increased over years. You can show it has increased, and you have learned that the 30% is unrealistic. So then you have to change your goals. So it doesn't mean when you have set a certain goal and you can't reach it that you should hide it. No, you can show the realizations that are fit and show that at least there was a learning process for the goals you have set. Standard 4, and here we go, enhancement. Measures for enhancement. As a result of periodic evaluation, that's why the system was there. You have this system, you have all these numbers, and with these numbers you do it periodically. And once you have these periodic evaluations of all internationalization dimensions and activities, the successful implementation of measures for enhancement can be demonstrated. So what the institution shows is we have goals, we try to realize them, we measure them, and we see, well, things should be changed a little bit if we really want to get to this internationalization in an optimal way. Some of our objectives cannot be reached, some we didn't reach as we should have done, so there's at least a learning process for the institution. You show we have learned from what we measured for the goals we have set. There's the enhancing of education. The institution utilizes internationalization approaches as part of its regular quality assurance activities in order to enhance the quality of its education. there is also a learning process in doing the internationalization as well. In internationalization activities, you mostly have international partners, and so you start doing some peer research. You're doing what is happening in the other institution, and so what's happening in the other institution can have a learning effect for the institution itself. It's not just that things are happening. Being in contact with other institutions can make a learning process from the institution itself. Peer learning is quite an important thing. And so with the international activities, with the international partners, some new information, some new ideas can also get into the own institution. The stakeholders' involvement. The institution actively involves its internal and external stakeholders in its quality assurance and enhancement activities regarding internationalization. You should show that at least when you want to learn, you do not just measure what is happening internally within the programs and with the goals you have set, but also what do my alumni say on internationalization. If we had these big international programs within our institution, was it worth the effort for the alumni? Are they really prepared for international jobs? Can they say something about it? Of course, also the working field. Do they have to say something about it? Are the intercultural and international goals you have set within your program, are they really what is needed within the working field? Do you have any ideas about it? Are these people involved in your system? How many times do you interact with these groups, with the alumni? But also, what do the students and professors say themselves? What do they learn from the research activities they have? So how is it all intertwined, and how does it all enhance the system you have? I have to point it there. I want it there, but the computer is over there, I suppose. And then in the end, all of these measures, of course, have to be controlled somewhere. So the governance of the institution should make sure that you can have these goals and you can have these measurements of what is happening. But of course, if there's no communication between all these lines, everything is happening. But if you want to change your goals, somebody should be responsible for it. So if you have measured something and there's an alarm bell saying, well, things aren't really going as we want, the alarm bell itself is not enough. There should be some action. If at the fire department the alarm goes off but all firemen are sleeping, then nothing is happening, of course. And so that's the same in the institution. There's the alarm bell, and then at governance level they should say, someone has to pick it up. Somebody has to check whether our goals were right. Somebody has to translate it into new objectives. So everything, it's a whole system, it's a whole radar work, radars picking in each other. So they all have to work, otherwise you can do all kinds of things, but nothing is happening. So what the governance responsibilities? What responsibilities are there? The responsibilities regarding the institution's internationalization, the goals, the plans, implementation, and so ever, are clearly defined and allocated. So it's clear what should happen to realize it all, and it's also clear who will do it. And of course, it's always about the money. There should be enough supplies to do it. Then there's the effectiveness. The organizational structure, decision-making processes, and leadership support the realization of the institution's internationalization goals and action plans. So, what the structure is, who makes the decisions, is all clear set, so the information gets where it has to be. You really know what you want to measure. You really know who's responsible for it. And it's all effectively suited in each other. And of course, there's also responsiveness. The institution can demonstrate that it readily reacts to input from within and outside the institution regarding internationalization activities. How responsive are you? it's not only that you take measurements, it's also that you have in some sixth sense to know what it's all going on. What students report, what partners universities report, what you get from alumni. All these things can be measured, but there's even more. There can be students who say, well, I've been to this institution and it was really horrible and I didn't learn anything over there. It was a very nice experience, but I do not have the learning outcomes I need to continue my own program in the home country. So it could be that something is set, that you have, for example, a partnership abroad, and that some learning outcomes are promised, but that in the end the courses do not really fit it outside. So maybe the quality assurance in the partner institution is not really what it should be. And of course this can always be the case. I had this very funny experience when I was in the quality assurance, and they were also talking about the internationalization activities they had. So it was just in the regular quality assurance. And so they had, as a home university, a partnership with the university in Korea. And this partnership was already lasting for many decades, and it was all about biotechnology. And so, but I was in a program for linguistics. And so they had set up a partnership with the same institution on linguistics. And so when we asked for the reasons why do you have this partnership, it was because it already existed for biotechnology. So this is not really a good way to get this partnership, of course, because then, of course, you can set up something, but then the real work still has to start. How do you compare the programs? How do you compare the learning outcomes? Do they learn at this institution what they should learn? And when we were asking about this, no real information was popping up. So this was really internationalization for the internationalization. There was not really a perspective behind it. It was because they needed internationalization. It was expected that some number of students would go abroad, and okay, there was already this partnership with this institution, so okay, let's do it for linguistics as well. This is not really the way it should go. And so an institution itself should also see, if we want this internationalization, how realistic is it? How do we support our programs to offer this internationalization? And how can it all be in a way that should be? If it is impossible to have this contact with other institutions, then maybe you should get some international classrooms, or maybe you should be more inventive on how to organize it. But just the idea that cross-border activity is enough can give very strange things. And then, of course, people come back from this cross-border activity, and, of course, they haven't learned what they should learn, what they should have learned to continue the program at the home university. So it's a quite complex thing. It needs many measures, it needs much control. But at least a university should have the responsiveness, if something like this happens, to have the responsiveness to react on it. Because when we asked, so how many students did go to this institution, they said, well, 2, but of one we don't know anything anymore. So this should be an alarm bell, and at least this information should be picked up. And not just said as, well, this is a fait divers that is coming along. So it's not easy. I have to admit, this framework, as I said, there's the carrot, and there's a lot of spanking of the carrot to get there. So it's not the easy thing, but in a sense, if you look at it, it's also quite clear what is going on. It's just about setting goals, translating them into right plans, and then looking, do the plans, and how do I realize these plans? How do I control the plans? And is the governance of my institution aware of what is going on, and can they put the right button when it's needed? So that's just the easy framework that's behind. That's the Calatrava thing that is behind it. It's very easy. But of course the criteria are a little bit more specific to show that things are really moving in the right direction. The criteria are just there as what can be expected if you really want to meet these standards. And how you do it, that's the responsibility of the institution. And as I said, it's an enhancement framework. If you want to get involved into this, it can be a starting point. It can be a learning process. It can be to show, well, where are we with our international activities? And then, of course, once you know where you are, it's more clear what steps you have to take if you know where you want to go to. So that's why there is the certificate with this framework, and this is done by accreditation organization, well, by ECA, and so panels are coming along. But there's a new step now from NVO we have also started, and it's in fact an ECA perspective, but from NVO I know that this weekend the first one will be executed. It is also possible that people from NVO come along just to see what is going on. Just some baseline assessment in which you can just see where are we now. So you do not really step into the system of the real procedure in which a panel is coming along. No, it's just the people knowing what should be met in the framework who come along and who will look at your institution to see what the baseline is. Where are you now? And is it already realistic to step into the procedure to get a certificate? So that's a new step that can be taken. It's more a kind of, it's not really it's the full procedure, but it's not the panels coming along. It's just we who will look at what is going on. So that's a possibility. Now let's see. I think I do not know how much time I still have. Shall we take some question time, or
we have 1 hour and a half, but we started
late,
about 15 minutes late. So we have half an hour more.
Yeah. I can say something. Well, here we have the schedule for the program. So I was talking about the institutional level up to now. I will just shortly say something about the program level. So if you say as a program, well, my institution is not bad at internationalization, but we as a program are way better, and we want to get the certificate, that's also a possibility. So it should not be at institutional level, and even it can be at school or faculty level as well, because a school, if it's quite independent schools or faculties within an institution, of course, as a school or faculty, you can also ask the procedure as it is at institutional level. That's also a possibility, and that's also the two that have been achieved in Spain so far. So again, if you look at the program level, again you say, well, what is my intended internationalization? What do I want to realize? That's the general goals we want to set. And these intended internationalizations are translated into the intended international and intercultural learning outcomes. And the slides that I have made up here, completely in the end, you will see that there is a list of this kind of learning outcomes, so you can see this is a good practice, this is how the international and intercultural learning outcomes can be translated. If I have set certain goals, I did not mention the goals, but at least you can see what nice and well-formulated intended international and intercultural learning outcomes can look like. And of course, these should get into the teaching and learning environment. So teaching and learning should be organized such that if you have set your intended international and intercultural learning outcomes, that you have some kind of a, I hope I did introduce the slide. Wait, I will go to it. Oh, what are you doing here? I need the basic one. Voila. That's what you need in your program. So once you have this very big goals of what you, as a program, you want to have as internationalization, and then you translate it into these international and intercultural learning outcomes, which can fit together with the general intended learning outcomes you have. So, but the intended are a translation of what do you aim to do? And of course, how do you realize that aim is in your teaching and learning. And within that teaching and learning, now I need the next one again, you should have something like this. Because a program has many program modules. You can have 10, 20. These are intertwined. And once you have these modules, you should have to see, well, in what module do I have a certain learning outcome? So I have the big picture, and I make it in more readable objectives. And once I have these objectives, I need to know, where do I realize them? I have a program. I have many program modules. And so how do I translate them? I have to see where they pop up into my program. And so once one of these intended learning outcomes is missing in the end, then you have a problem for your program. And so you have the general intended learning outcomes and you have the international ones. And so if you want this international ambition, then all of these international and intercultural learning outcomes should pop up somewhere in here. So that's how you do realize the intended learning outcomes you had. And then there's another step. Of course, you also have to assess it. You can say, well, these intended learning outcomes are translated somewhere into my modules, but do my students really achieve these learning outcomes? And how do you achieve them? That's the kind of assessment you need. And that's why also you have these different kind of assessment. And that's why you have all these kind of possibilities how to give a course. And so next to this matrix, you should also have one. If I have a certain intended learning outcome and I put it in a certain module, then the module should be fit to get to this intended learning outcome to achieve it. If I want students to discuss in an international setting, then it should be strange if you would do it in a way as I'm doing here, just giving a lecture. How do they learn to discuss with each other when I'm just giving a lecture? Then there should be sessions in which the students can interact with each other. In which, for example, if you want leadership, in which one of the students have to lead the discussion. If you want it in an international and intercultural setting, then at least the classroom should have some international students. Because if they're all from the same country, if they're all Spanish, then what do they learn for international and intercultural intended learning outcomes? So that's what it is. I want, for example, students to be able to discuss in an international setting and for every once in a while to get some leadership in it. Then I have to organize my classroom in such a way that this is possible. And I also have to assess it this way. And this assessment could be some kind of peer assessment, in which, for example, if somebody had to be the leader of the discussion, that all the other students get involved in the assessment and in the discussion on how this person performed as a leader for the discussion. So these are all possibilities to do it, but as you see, this one becomes more complex because everything has to fit together to get the intended learning outcome. The intended learning outcome, as I formulated, has to be in a module. The module has to be set up in a way that makes it possible to achieve this learning outcome. And then I still have a kind of assessment that shows that it really is achieved. So you need some of these well, you don't need them, but it's very handy to have these matrix to show how things are linked together. Any questions about this? Yeah, okay. So, and as you see, this is the program level, but it really resembles what I said about institutional level. In a sense, you can make the same kind of matrix if you want to show how things are realized within the institution. But at program level, of course, it's easy because we are immediately at these intended learning outcomes, which can be easily described. You make some 10 learning outcomes for the program, you show in which module, and you show how they can be realized. Okay. I will skip. And now I have to go back. So this, as I said, and I already mentioned it, the fitness of purpose and the fitness for purpose. The fitness of purpose are my intended learning outcomes, international, intercultural, really set in a way that they make able to achieve my goals. The fitness for purpose is my teaching and my learning process, is my staff ready to do what it has to do to perform this kind of courses. Do they get the means if they need international classrooms? Do we have the web utilities? Do we have the computers? Do we have all kinds of environmental stuff that is needed to make this possible? So that's all intertwined. Staff needs to be ready to do it. Are the student classes mixed enough to get this international experience, etc.? So that's the fitness for purpose. Fitness of purpose. My intended learning outcomes are fit to get what I want. The fitness for purpose. My programs are set up in such a mean that they will make it possible for the students, or that they will allow the students to achieve what was intended as learning outcomes. It's really funny. I did not expect that these slides would still be in there, and they are. So there's some magic in this thing. Very nice. Your computer knows more than mine does, though. Maybe I can finish with this slide to show that it is all intertwined in a certain way, and that all things need to be in place to get what you want. Because here we have all kinds of possibilities in which one of the links could miss. And I think it's a very nice picture, because it shows, or you do all of it, or you better don't start with it. And maybe it's the same at the institutional level. You have intended internationalization. You want to reach something as an institution, and maybe it can be influenced by what is normal at the country level. But at least you want to get something, the big picture. So the big picture has to be translated in something that is more concrete, and that's the learning outcomes, the intended learning outcomes, and for internationalization, the international and intercultural learning outcomes. This has to be realized, and the realization is through teaching and learning. The learning process for the student, the staff that is involved, and the teaching, how the modules are set up, how the learning outcomes are implemented, etc. And of course you also need the assessment, because intended is very nice, you can intend everything, but of course you also want to achieve it, especially when it were intended, when you had this intended internationalization. And once you have all of these modules, then you will get the achieved learning outcomes. If you do not have intended internationalization, if there's not a big plan, then you will get some learning outcomes, but they will not fit together. So in the end there will be some confusion. You will get something, but you really don't know what it's really about, because there was no big plan behind it. If you miss the intended learning outcomes, you will get ambiguity. There's a big plan, but it was not really specific what should be going on, so maybe some part of it will be realized, but in what sense, not clear. If you miss the teaching, then you get the anxiety, because of course if there's only professors or lecturers who are in front of the classroom, and for example one of your learning outcomes, as I said, is that you are able to discuss in an international setting, you will never practice it. Maybe we'll do outside, and maybe some will, but maybe some will just listen to the professor what he's telling, and in the end they will have learned nothing. So, but it was intended, but they are never able to achieve it. If you miss the learning, then you get the frustration, because all kinds of things are expected, but it cannot be realized, because the setting is not there. And if you miss the assessment, you never know if they have achieved it. It's possible that everything is there to achieve it, but you don't know. So as you see, all elements are needed to show that the two sides of the same coin, the intended and the achieved learning outcomes, are really there. Otherwise, you could have a coin with one blank side or two blank sides. Okay? And I will leave it like this. If you have any questions, you're welcome. Okay.
Muy bien. ¿Preguntas? Damos paso entonces a la ronda de preguntas.
Okay, so now I switch. I find that this is a great framework, and it's great because it tells you what you need to have, or what you need to have thought of, or what you need to have in terms of organization before you even start about thinking to implement it, which is not usually the case. And the way you use the powers or how you make yourself the suit, I can really empathize with. I don't know very much about sewing, but the thing is, I can really tell when a suit is good. I mean, the stitching is handmade. I mean, there are a lot of details that I can recognize. Now, coming from the International Baccalaureate, because I've been in it for a very, very long time, I find that soft skills are really, really hard to assess. Like you were saying, you have to bring this down to reality, to something that can be, in fact, measured. So, if we take the example that you put, that 20% of the classroom, right, has to be of an international origin. And you yourself said, this is not necessarily something that will have an international learning outcome. But what would that international learning outcome look like, and how would you measure it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Got it?
Yeah. So that's the operational.
How do you bring it down to the, okay,
yeah.
How do I take these students actually are now more internationalized than they were when we started the project?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So when I said about this 20%, that's mostly what I said at institutional levels or even at national levels. I know it in Belgium, they say, well, 20% has to go outside. This is a possibility. Now here you have, and that's why you need the whole picture, of course, as you said. Once you have this learning outcome, it could be that, for example, the international and intercultural is that you set up these discussions, that you have these mixed discussions in classrooms. That's a learning outcome you could have. So students get involved in these sessions in which they have to interact, in which one of the students has to show leadership, and in which there is an intercultural discussion on the subject. And now, for example, take it in nursery. So in a nursery education. So the 20% rule is very good because at least you have people from abroad who are in there. That's what makes you sure. That's the general objective you have as an institution. And so you have the 20%. And even if you put a qualitative side on it, you could say 10% from Africa, 10% from Asia. So the cultural shock for nursery is way bigger than when you would say they are from the United States. And then if you need to discuss about it, it could be combined with another learning outcome that you are able to function as a nurse within a field hospital in Africa. So that's a very different setting. And this also combines with the facilities that have to be made, but that you can make a setup, so a classroom in which you have this combination of things. Then, of course, you get the interaction between the students. You have this population of students from the country where what your aim is. Then you have your own students, and then you are in a new situation which is way different than what you're used to in a setup as a nurse in, for example, Spain. And so as a teacher, then you have to see how does this interaction. Somebody has to take the leadership within this situation. And the others also have to act in it with their knowledge, with their background. And so, example, the leadership could be somebody from abroad, could be somebody from the home country. So this is how you interact, how the intended learning outcome, the discussion part is in it, the second one is also in it, and you have organized this within this one classroom.
That's like a role play.
That's a kind of role play, yes.
And for example, empathy, I would suppose that in a situation like this would be interesting to see how you measure empathy again.
Yeah. So, but that's why you need the matrices as well. You need to show that how these skills can be translated within it. So that's how the matrix shows that if I organize it this way, and if I have set up my classroom like this, then I'm able to realize this learning outcome. It's just not saying I have this learning outcome and it's in my module. The module has to be set up. That's why you need the teaching and the criteria of teaching and of the facilities that are there. Because, well, the facilities need to be there to set up this kind of classroom. The institution needs to make sure that you have this mixed classroom. So that's how things are intertwined, of course. And also the soft ones, and of course they are difficult to measure, that's for sure. It's a really difficult one. But at least by doing the exercise of how can I organize my classrooms, how do I get this interaction, and how do I measure it? For example, this could be the peer learning activity, of course. If I want to measure this as the professor itself, then there's only one person. But for example, if you have the situation made up that one needs to take leadership, then the peer students can see, well, for example, evaluate the empathy that is shown within the situation.
Like the learning outcome.
Voila. Yeah. So that's how things it's just an ideal situation, of course, because they are difficult to measure. That's for sure. But at least you can make the process of trying to implement this within the program.
Yes. Any other questions? ¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿Sí? Rudolf?
Thanks for your presentation, very nice presentation. And I have a doubt. It is about the certification of the institution and the certification of the programs. Mm-hmm. It means that when you try to certificate the institution, you have to assess or to evaluate all the programs in the institution. No. I misunderstood that.
No. This would be way too hard, I think. Yeah. No. So the criteria set there is really what should be, and if things should be documented, of course, there can be a trail and there can be examples given from. But it certainly is not the case that what the framework tells about programs should be executed for every program to get it at institutional level. So the institutional level is really the standards and criteria as I have shown them, and you do not have to get to every program. The only thing you have to show is that these dimensions are in there. So you will, as an institution or as a faculty, if it's at faculty level, you have to show that in some sense there is control over what the learning outcomes and programs are. That somebody shows it. So that this also relates to the governance, but it's not that you have to see each of these sets of learning outcomes, of course.
Bien, una pregunta más. One more question. ¿Sí? This framework could be extended to other educational functions like investigation, research, or extension. And what kind of function do they fulfill in this framework?
What research and such?
Yeah, how do research and vinculation with environment fit into this model, into this framework?
Yeah.
Do they have any role in education, and how could this?
Yeah.
Hmm? Bien.
I'm very sorry I will not be able to answer in Spanish, but I will. I hope somebody wants to make the translation for me.
Yeah, we can both make a translation. So
Yeah.
No problem. Ya le traduje. Sí. Okay.
Yeah.
Adelante.
Of course, as I said, the general definition was about the purpose and the function of the internationalization. And so function and purpose always relate to the broader picture of what internationalization and what the aims of the institutions are. So if you look at the function of most institutions, you have the learning, but you also have the public service, and you also have the research. And so...
In order to make a translation, let me
Yeah, okay.
Vamos a traducir en parte. Ya, puedes entender entonces. Bien.
Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah.
The passive language is better than the active one, so they can understand what you say, but they cannot frame it. Phrase it. Okay.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have asked the question as well.
Of course.
Which is very good. Yeah. So these components are always in there, and so partner institutions, for example, how do you get partner institutions? Also, is via research. How do you get to the working field? How do you get the investigation? Is always related, of course, to public service as well. So these things are, in every sense, are intertwined. So it's never possible to just take the teaching and the aims you have for internationalization as an isolated component. So once you have your aims set in general, these will relate to the research you have as an institution and to the public service you have. And once you translate them, this will be translated within the learning outcomes as well. So in a passive way, they're always involved. And it's on the institution, as I said, it's the carrot model. It's as the institution to show how much these things are intertwined and how much you want to get all these other fields or the research and the public service intertwined with your teaching. So that's a choice you make, but in most cases this will evidently be intertwined in the system. So it's not an isolated case. But it's not that the framework is doing an assessment of research. It will only do an assessment of research related to the education you give. So if you say within our framework and in the goals we have set, we want to make sure that professors from partner institutions will give lectures to get the newest research from that field. This, of course, is a very nice aim you have, and it's a very nice translation. If you can translate it to learning outcomes, for example, if you say, well, at my institution we do not have all expertise on a certain field, so we will introduce researchers from another institutions who have it, and this is related to our international activities, well, that's very fine, of course. That's one of the ways it could be realized. And then it will be fully within the system, of course, and within the evaluation and the framework.
Muy bien. Muchas gracias. Quiero entonces que demos un gran aplauso para el doctor Dagmar Hogan. Thank you very much.